Okay, a lot of talk about Chinese EVs again. Some people saying the Chinese will dominate a lot of the EV market and think it will be very similar to the invasion of Japanese autos that we saw in the 70s with the oil crisis, and that we will see the same with Chinese EVs in the US. So I wanted to go over my thoughts on how this might play. The reason Japanese autos did so well was mainly because the US autos had become so complacent, just built bigger engines and had no concern for fuel efficiency, as fuel was cheap and abundant. But with the oil crisis in the 70s, this gave the much smaller, more economical Japanese cars a huge opportunity, and their market share in the US proliferated as a result. Let's try and analyse this and see if we're likely to see the same occur again, and spot the differences and the causes. In other words, what chance do the Chinese EVs have of competing in the US? Now, one major difference with the Japanese cars is that there wasn't already the best version of a compact, great value, safest, most fuel efficient, highest production number already present in the US, i.e. there was no Tesla equivalent back then against the Japanese. That is one major difference already. If it was the 70s and the equivalent scenario, there would have already been a US brand that was able to offer better fuel efficiency than the Japanese and at a lower price already, and it's specialised in that. Not to mention it about to increase its domestic production dramatically with a new gigafactory in Texas. But as we can see from Tesla's waiting list, demand for EVs is going crazy, and with this inevitable EV credit rebate, demand will go through the roof, even when Tesla gets Texas online and ramped up. There is no one else selling EVs in the US to any degree, and Tesla has about 3/4 of the BEV market share in that nation. That's a big market share, and it would be higher if they could make more, except by the end of next year, Tesla should have easily doubled their run rate. And then hopefully Texas is up to a 2 to 3 million run rate by the end of 2023, not to mention Fremont expanding too, which, at a guess, including waiting lists, Tesla has about 1/3 of the US auto market. I include waiting lists as there'll be plenty of people that order and have to wait a year or two for their Tesla, which means in the meantime they're holding on to their previous cars longer. This consumer is unlikely to buy a new ICE car in the meantime. They have likely understood electric is the future and wouldn't want to buy an ICE car that they know will likely heavily depreciate. A 1-year waiting list is probably 2 to 3 million orders by perhaps this time next year, and I don't think that's factoring in the Cybertruck. So with the rebate, the waiting list will become longer and longer, as well as more people catching on that EVs are the future. I think legacy autos will advertise relentlessly their hybrid vehicles and offer you the best financing imaginable, except you still have to buy that directly from the car dealer network, and if you want to walk away with a car today, then expect perhaps an extra $10,000 on that advertised price list, as the car dealers can sell at any price they want, or else wait 6 months or so for another one. The same would likely apply for legacy BEVs too. So there will be waiting lists for all cars except perhaps ICE. But consumers, at least in the US, have likely realised that the future is electric. The realisation is becoming exponential, but you may have to wait 1 or 2 years for a Tesla, or pay even more for a used Tesla. Therefore, if you want an EV sooner, then there may actually be potential demand for an alternative, which could be the Chinese EVs, as the legacy EVs are not showing any sign of delivering any substantial numbers anytime soon, but we have seen plenty of ramping up in China. Now, although we see the Chinese EVs priced less than Teslas in China and selling well, they do have local benefits and incentives. If China sells their EVs in the US, they have the opposite. For starters, there is the extra cost of shipping the vehicles across the Pacific Ocean, but then they're also likely to face a 20% import tariff. On top of that, all other EVs in the US are getting up to $12,500 off in a rebate. This does not cover Chinese EVs. That's quite a discrepancy. But firstly, why don't we work out why it is the Chinese are able to make so many EVs and the legacy autos are struggling so much? Surely there must be some shortcuts they're taking to achieve this, right? What about batteries? Where are they getting all the batteries from? And why aren't the legacy autos able to source them? Correct, the Chinese are using LFP batteries. LFP batteries use lower cost, more abundant iron in their cathodes compared to the higher priced, more scarce nickel batteries. This is how they make so many cars so much faster. They are less battery constrained. Then it begs the question, why do Ford not just use LFP batteries too? Then they could compete against Tesla as well and build more cars faster. Well, for starters, China has a manufacturing advantage. We've seen how quickly the Chinese are able to launch new iterations of EVs and improve with every design. Just check some of the old BYD models if you don't believe me. They're absolutely hideous. And now the likes of the BYD Han is not so bad. They've caught up on design. But that's all in my opinion. caught up. I can't see them taking over, as they lack innovation. Check free markets compared to command economies. Innovation is what free markets create. So they caught up by copying everyone else's designs. For example, the BYD Han has a strong resemblance to the Lucid Air. There is very little original thinking here. Bear in mind that this advantage China has likely will only be in China. For instance, if they set up factories in the US, there's far less manufacturing talent and resources than in China. Also, their batteries would not be locally produced, along with the majority of their components. Okay, so the Chinese can outmanufacture EVs over legacy autos, and it's also easier for them without all the legacy systems in the way, and executives with antiquated ways of thinking, along with families that own huge stakes in legacy autos that don't want to risk losing their precious money-making ICE business. It's very conflicting, so there are all sorts of struggles with legacy autos, but they are predominantly battery constrained and they are not all in on EVs. Then why don't Ford just use LFP batteries in their EVs? Tesla do, so why not Ford? Well, do you remember all those efforts we've seen Tesla make in ensuring their cars run as efficiently as possible, and with impressive drag coefficients to reduce resistance, heat pumps, octavalves, removing unnecessary parts, efficient powertrains, motors, software, structural battery packs, weight reduction? Well, as a result, Tesla can use LFP batteries and still offer a 267-mile range on the Model 3. That's with a 55 kilowatt-hour battery pack. On top of that, Tesla still give you a 0 to 60 time of 5.8 seconds, which is actually still pretty quick. Just compare it with a typical ICE car. A Toyota Camry is about 7.5 seconds. So obviously Tesla's specs are more than adequate. And actually, this was previously 5.3 seconds. Tesla recently reduced this, but I think there is more than meets the eye, and we'll get into that in another video. But this is where the Chinese struggle. They don't have all these absolutely outstanding, impressive engineering techniques that Tesla does, as much as I'm sure they attempt to reverse engineer them. Besides, it's a moving target. Tesla keep outdoing themselves. When the Chinese know what to do with it, Tesla are already done with it. Now, let's compare this with the BYD Han. I use the Han as I think it is the best example. They even use their own in-house batteries called the Blade, which, as far as I know, are the most efficient LFP batteries, better than the CATL batteries that Tesla are using. Of course, until Tesla start making their own LFP batteries, which will be the biggest game changer in the entire EV industry. Now, even on the BYD website, they're very coy about giving out too much information about the specifications of their cars, only range and horsepower. But anyway, there are other resources, and it turns out that the Han has an 80 kilowatt-hour battery pack, over 1/3 larger than the Tesla. That's quite a bit bigger, especially when the battery pack is the most expensive and heaviest element of an EV. This equates to their longest range version coming in at 605 kilometers NEDC, which when converted to EPA in miles, comes in at 262 miles of range, which isn't too far off the Model 3 at 267 miles. Now, in China, these cost $42,500, excluding the subsidy. BYD's BEV business also makes a loss. A Model 3 is still only about $45,000, except it was down to $36,000 earlier this year, and still profitable. The BYD is not profitable at $42,500. Now, when I say not profitable, I mean they are not making a net profit on their BEV business. BYD actually do make an overall net profit as a company, supplemented by their hybrid business. Anyway, add a 20% tariff onto that and some shipping to the US, and we're at around $52,000. Now, as they also added all those extra batteries in their vehicle, and they were iron batteries too, well, iron is dense. Not energy dense, but has an actual greater density than nickel. These extra batteries add significantly to the weight of the vehicle. Now, like I said, BYD do not give out many of their specifications, but the weight starts at 4,400 pounds, so it's likely more for their longest range version, whereas the Tesla is only 3,582 pounds. Wow, probably almost 1,000 pounds lighter compared to BYD's longest range. And of course, the BYD still has less range. This ends up meaning that the 0 to 60 time is about 8 seconds, compared to the latest Model 3 at 5.8 seconds, which used to be 5.3 seconds. That's a huge difference, and likely not good enough for a lot of drivers in the US. I've driven on LA freeways, and not having enough power at times can be dangerous. Not to mention the range is likely not adequate for a lot of US drivers. Excuse me, Tesla economist, I actually invest in BYD too. I think I know the company a bit better than you. The Han can actually do 0 to 60 in 4 seconds. Yes, there is a performance version, the Supreme, which has a 486 horsepower compared to the others at 218 horsepower. Well, this is true, and this car would cost $58,000 to import into the US. Remember, still no profit. In fact, I would say this car has a much bigger loss and was possibly only made to show that they can reach performance if they want to, proving they are just as good as Tesla on paper. I could not find the size of the battery they used to achieve this, but I'll tell you, it's not using BYD's Blade LFP batteries. This performance can only be achieved with nickel batteries. Tesla use an 82 kilowatt-hour nickel battery in their performance version, and it comes in at 3.1 seconds to 60. Like I said, BYD don't like to present any information or specs about their cars. Tesla is much more transparent. I could never invest in a company that hides things from their investors. So that's a red flag for me. And Tesla's Model 3 performance is still cheaper than this would cost in the US, with no rebates, let alone $8,000 off. Okay, so I use BYD as the best example as they are the biggest selling EV company after Tesla. They also have their own in-house battery and vertical integration, yet they can't beat Tesla on price in the US at their current prices that do not make a profit. They also can't beat Tesla on performance or range. Their vehicles also cost more to build. These prices are high, especially when compared to a brand new hybrid from a brand that people trust, for lack of a better word, or perhaps are proven, i.e. Ford and GM. Basically, if the Chinese enter the US market, they're not going to be able to compete on price. They will cost about $15,000 more than an equivalent Tesla with a tax rebate. It might also be similar in many other markets outside of the US too. Okay, this is just the start, but it's already been a long video, so I will continue it on another video. Thanks for listening. Please hit the thumbs up and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter and talk to me on Patreon.